Hi, my name is John Mcalister, and this is a presentation about the following question. Should a right to intellectual property, also known as IP, be seen as a human right, or should it be excluded from human rights? The presentation will cover where IP has been defined as a human right, the arguments for and against. We'll have a look at where we are today with these arguments and my views on the presentation. And I'll finish the presentation with a look at the research sources and a short conclusion. So to start with, who or what says that intellectual property is a basic right of all peoples? This right is enshrined in Article 27.2 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which was approved by the General Assembly in 1948. It says, and I quote, "Everyone has the right to protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific, literary or artistic production of which he is the author." This right to intellectual property is also defined in the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, approved by the UN in 1966. Clause 15C states, "The Covenant recognises the right of everyone to benefit from the protection of the moral and material interests resulting from any scientific or artistic production of which he is the author." So how did the drafters of the Declaration of Human Rights argue their case for inclusion of intellectual property? The argument for the right to own the intellectual property rights starts with the classical natural law views espoused by John Locke in the 1670s. He stated that these rights are natural, inherent, equal to all, and universal to humans everywhere. He contended that we own our own bodies and therefore we own the results of the labour from them. People are entitled, in his view, to the material interests of their efforts as a matter of right. Locke's views were very influential on a range of European nations, and that philosophy was exported to the Latin American colonies of the time, such that by the time of the drafting of the Declaration, it was those representatives who argued strongly for the humanist perspective. The drafters were also influenced by the Berne Convention on IP from 1928. At that convention, one of the delegates, Fernandez de Callo, said, "Intellectual creations are the product of human genius. They are the main distinctive attribute of human beings. These rights are extended to all creative humans who make a contribution to society through art and sciences." The primary argument for conclusion by the drafters is that natural human rights are not something that we are born with, but that other people and society confer on us as a moral right. It's also important to make the point that the drafters of Article 27 never intended that authors and inventors have exclusive rights for all time over their work or see patents and copyright as a human right. To argue against the human right to IP, we can start with the authors of the UN Declaration itself. Firstly, the complete lack of consensus for the article's inclusion and form. During the article's period of development, there was considerable disagreement that the clause should be included at all, let alone in its current form. There was a tension between not only those arguing for and against IP rights as human rights, but between Western delegates and Latin American delegates in their philosophical approach to human rights. There's also evidence that the delegates themselves did not know enough about the existing international IP law environment. While the South Americans won the day in the finished Article 27, it is this disagreement that is quite revealing. In the final vote, 18 countries voted for Article 27 too. 13 against, 10 abstained. The article was carried with only a 44% direct approval, hardly a ringing endorsement for a fundamental human right. So what was underneath this disagreement? So the Western delegates argued that Locke's natural human rights were fanciful. Their views were grounded in the positivism and Marxist views that rights only come from those decreed by governments. They were considered a child of law. As a consequence, IP rights are not human rights, and as such, these rights can be dealt with through other international laws covering copyright. Marx actually argued that the right to property equates to the right to self-interest and is therefore independent of society and is consequently an anti-human right. It can be argued that the Declaration articles in the first section, 1 to 21, are classical Enlightenment views of rights, such as freedom of religion, right to life, whereas Articles 22 to 30, the last section, are about economic rights, such as work, rest and leisure, which is where Article 27 fits in. The argument is then that the individual's rights for IP should be less important against the needs of wider humanity to share in the benefits of science. Surely that is a greater human right. So where are we today? With the implementation of the TRIPS agreement in '94, administered by the WTO, ushering in a new wave of IP law, this has put a spotlight on the tension between human rights, commercial interests in new inventions, and the rights of all citizens to enjoy the benefits of scientific advancement. Notably, TRIPS does not mention human rights anywhere in the agreement. And while the Declaration of Human Rights is not formally law, it is aspirational and advisory, and it is established as a standard to which disputes in the WTO can be judged against. It's arguable, given the very real injustices brought about by international IP laws, that they do anything but protect human rights. And while I have a lot of sympathy for the view that IP rights are not human rights, they are, in essence, at the weaker end of the human rights scale somewhat, and are more of an economic right, and that the Declaration is placing an emphasis on those who can create and invent over society as a whole. And as such, I don't think this sits as easily in the Human Rights Declaration. The following articles and reports have been used to assist the development of this presentation. A number are excellent accounts of the mechanics and politics and back and forth of how the UN Declaration of Human Rights was developed, literally clause by clause. To finish and summarise the presentation, we have looked at the sources of IP as a human right and the arguments for and against its inclusion in the Universal Declaration 76 years ago. The drafters of Article 27.2 thought that the personal creative capacities of individuals was worth protecting as fundamental human rights. They could not, however, generate an international consensus for this view. As a human right that can transcend time, peoples and place, it does not stand up then or now. Intellectual property should be excluded as a basic human right. Thank you.